Hello. Have you ever seen the movie Forrest Gump? Well, that was my life growing up. But unlike Forrest, when the neighborhood bullies chased me around with rocks, and they did, my leg braces didn't magically fly off and lead me to a football scholarship. That's me. So, growing up with spina bifida, I was teased, bullied, ridiculed, picked on pretty much daily. As you can imagine, I didn't get along well with others. I was pretty introverted, as you might say. I would often stay behind during recess and offer to help the teachers with whatever they needed, just so I wouldn't have to go outside and face my peers. Surprisingly, none of my teachers ever took the time to get to notice. In fact, it was a school nurse who first came to my aid. Since mobility was an issue for me, she got me this sweet tricycle to get around. I thought it would lead to more freedom, but it only led to more ridicule. I resigned myself to fade into the background. I was going to be as invisible as possible. It didn't help that my family moved around a lot, so invisibility was not really an option when every couple of years there were new schools, new students, new ridicule, new bullying. Why do we get into teaching? It's the money, isn't it? No, of course not. It's the students. But if it's the students, then why do we have teachers? Why did I have teachers that never bothered to care about me? Why did it take a couple of school nurses to come to my aid? Well, as it turns out, I don't know. But I do know that there is a growing divide between what teachers say they do and what students claim they see. And I do know that with all the problems facing education, perhaps the most important is that we must bridge the gap together. When I first started teaching, I was going to be the cool teacher. I was going to be their best friend. They were all going to love me. I was going to be the one that, everybody hung out with. I was going to be their best friend, but as you can imagine, that didn't work out so well. In fact, it only took a couple of weeks for me to notice that not only was I not their friend, I was dangerously close to losing control of my classroom. I knew something had to be done. So I started looking within myself. What was I doing wrong? And I realized that it was because I was so focused on what I needed for the classroom, what my wants, what my concerns were for a successful year, that I wasn't worried about them, what their wants, their concerns were. I started researching, and I came across this study that showed that of thousands of students in the high school and college that were surveyed, the biggest concern that they had was respect. They needed their teachers to respect them. Now, I'm not talking about treating the students as peers or as equals, but as human beings. As an educator, I was shocked that something so obvious was being overlooked. I mean, we all claim that we want to help our students, but yet, why were the students claiming that the teachers didn't even bother to look at them as humans? How can you teach students when you don't see them as human beings? I knew I had to change something in my classroom. So the rest of that school year and going into the next school year, I focused not on the curriculum, but on getting to know my students. Not their names or their hobbies, but their wants, their needs, their concerns, and their fears, and then trying to help them through those problems. One of my first years in implementing this, I had a student in my classroom. He was a real gangster, and I don't mean one of those wannabe gangsters with their designer jeans hanging around their ankles. I mean an actual gangster. He was a pretty intimidating individual. He would sit in the back of all of his classes, and he'd just kind of stare off into space. I thought about him, and I thought, something strikes me as odd about him. I mean, here he was, a 19-year-old junior who had been written off by his other teachers as a lost cause. But he showed up every single day. And whether he admitted it or not, I could tell that he was paying attention. So one day after class, I asked him, "Tell me your story. I want to know you and what makes you tick." His eyes lit up, and you could tell that no other teacher had ever bothered to take the time to really get to know him. And he told me that he had been involved in gangs from a really young age. He was trying to get out, but he knew that he needed a high school diploma. But he was afraid that he was too stupid to get one. And this broke my heart. So I made a deal with him, and I worked with him every single day. Slowly but surely, his grades began to improve, and so did his confidence. Sadly, one day, he stopped showing up altogether. And I found out that he had been killed in a drive-by protecting his family. I'll never forget him or the lessons that he taught me, and every time I have a difficult student, I think about him. Back in high school, a school nurse that came to my rescue, she offered me the opportunity to speak in front of my peers in a safe environment, a Q&A session. And there, in front of about 60 or 80 of my peers, I told my story. As introverted as I had become, I don't know why I said yes, but I did. And so I told this story, and I answered their burning questions. And I'll never forget that at the end of my story, one of my peers, he raised his hand and he said, "Man, Paul, I never knew you had gone through so much. If I'd never seen you walk, I would have never guessed you were any different." The other students in the room, they nodded their heads in approval. And they began to applaud, not just for me, but for the other special needs students that were in the classroom. The change in climate and culture that cultivated from that day and permeated into the rest of that school year and into the next led to some of the best memories I have of high school. It completely changed my world. We all care as educators. I mean, that's obvious. But maybe we've been going about it the wrong way. When I first started teaching, I was writing referral after referral, often with little effect. Now, I can count on one hand the amount of times that I have to write a student up in a given year. And it doesn't matter what grade level, it doesn't matter what class, the results are the same. And it all has to do with respect. Famous educator Jamie Escalante once said, "The power of love and concern in changing young lives should not be overlooked." I had an observation from an administrator not too long ago. And after I was done with my observation, she took me into her office and gave me my results. And she said that what she saw in there, in my classroom, was organized chaos. I know that sounds horrible to me too, right? But she quickly explained what she meant. She said that at first glance, it looked like the students were taking over, that they were just socializing. But the more she watched, the more she walked around, the more she listened, she realized that the students were taking control of their education. I had flipped the classroom, to coin the popular phrase. She asked me my secret, and I simply said, respect. We have to respect them so that they will in turn respect us. My last problem student that I had, he was floored after a particularly bad incident. When I took him out into the hall, you could tell from his face that he was expecting me to yell at him. But instead, I simply apologized to him. His jaw dropped and I said, "I'm sorry. I failed you as an educator. What can I do to help you? What can I do to give you a successful year in my class?" The two of us had a very serious heart-to-heart. And from that moment on, he became my biggest ally. We all care. We all want to help our students, but perhaps we don't know how. My suggestion, we bridge the gap together. Thank you.